This conference will now be recorded.
Hi
Get
guys.
ready to go, Chris.
Hello. Hey, I'm Chris. I am the park naturalist at Noster State Park in Noster, Missouri. And I know most of you know where that is, but some folks are from out of state. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So my park is between Sedalia and Warrensburg, and it's a really great place, and I love it. And y'all should come out and enjoy the park with me. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about some bat adaptations, some really cool things that bats do, some things that they do for us, some things they do for themselves, and how we can help bats. So this spooky time of year is a really good opportunity to talk about bats because they're all on our radar. And I say radar as a joke. So bats are one of my favorite animals. And we'll start with bats are mammals, okay? So I know in the snake program, I had a snake buddy with me. Today, I have a different kind of buddy. This is not a live bat, but it is a preserved bat so that I can show you. So this is my friend here. This is a native Missouri bat. It's called a hoary bat. So I will try to use this bat. He's very delicate, so I'm going to be real gentle with him. And I'll try to use him. Let's see if he'll say hello here. To show you guys some really cool things about bats. And then I also have some really neat photos and a diagram or two that I'll share with you guys as well as we're going through. So a lot of time you'll get to see my awesome Batty face. And then other times I'll show you these the photos that I have. Okay, so bats are mammals, just like us. So people are mammals. So we have a lot of things in common with bats that that you might not think. So what is a mammal? So a mammal has some main characteristics, and one of the biggest ones is that they're covered in fur. But I mean, I look like I'm covered in fur today, but sometimes we don't think as people being covered in fur. But if you think about it, your body has hair all over it, all over your arms and on your head, if you're lucky, on your head and the rest of your body. Whereas a bat has it covering most of its little body. And you can kind of see, I'll move it here, the fur on this bat. Right? So if you think fur kind of like maybe your cat has or your dog has, our bats have fur just like that. Other characteristics of mammals are that we have live birth. So our babies aren't born in eggs. We give birth to them live, and bats do the exact same thing. They also drink milk, just like our babies do. So when human babies are born, they drink milk from their mom or they drink formula, and bats do the exact same thing. Well, they don't have formula, but they do drink milk from their moms. Another key characteristic of mammals is that we are endotherms. So if you were on our snake program last week, you probably remember that an endotherm is something that makes its own heat in its body. So within its body, it makes its own heat. Whereas we were talking about snakes as exotherms because they cannot make their own heat and they have to bask. A bat uses food as energy to make its own heat, just like we do. So every time you eat tacos, you're going to make your own heat. Okay, every time you're drinking something, your body is making energy within itself, just like our little bat friends do. So our bats are mammals. And I think we're going to move over to the anatomy of a bat. So I'm going to share my screen. Is it working? I think so. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy of bats. And what I have here is one of my favorite pictures that I actually just took a few weeks ago. So this is a picture of some big brown bats that are hanging out in the park right now. They're on a building that had a little porch on it. And so just up in the porch, they like to roost in the rafters. So we'll go through here and talk about the anatomy of bats. So bats are pretty unique in the way that their bodies are set up. On this diagram, you can see a lot of information, and I only wanted to use this diagram to show a couple of things. First is we're going to talk about the ears of a bat. So an ear is the opening in your head where sound can come in. Now, bats have a really cool kind of piece of skin that comes up, and it looks a lot different on different kinds of bats, but it's called a tragus. If you touch on the side of your head and that earpiece that's flopping around, that's also a tragus. So you got more in common with bats than you think. So you both have a tragus that funnels in sound from everything that's coming outside. It also helps to protect the ear of the bat. So, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. The bats have very sensitive ears that help them to navigate things in the world, and their tragus really helps with that. On this picture, you can also see the bat's nose, which is where you would think it is. Right on the end of your face is your nose, and the same thing with the bat. But some bats have different kinds of noses, and it really depends on what kind of habitat the bat lives in, the kinds of foods that it eats, and the ways that it gets to its food. You can also see their wings. And if you look at the picture of the bat in the very middle, you can see that it has its arm that comes out from its body, and it has an elbow just like you. And then it comes down to its forearm just like you, and it has a wrist just like you, and it has a thumb. You guys see its thumb sticking up there? That thumb has a little nail on it, just like you have a nail, but it's a little pointy nail. And then it also has fingers. So do you see down the edge of the bat's wing where it's got fingers sticking out? So it's got fingers just like you do too. The biggest difference though is we don't have that big membrane, which is like a piece of skin that goes between all of its fingers and it connects to the bat's body. That's what the bat uses to fly. It also has, if you look down its body, it has its legs, and he has a knee, and there's a really cool thing about its knee. His knees move backwards from what our knees do. So ours bend on the front, theirs bend in the back, and that helps them to be able to roost upside down on things. They also have a really neat little piece of bone called a calcar by their foot, and it really helps to connect that membrane between their legs and their tails. Other things you can see on this diagram, which are pretty neat, and it shows the different kinds of wings that different species of bats have, and then same thing with their tail. And now these different characteristics on bats is what you can use to help you figure out what kind of bat it is. So if you're trying to figure out, is it a big brown bat? Is it a hoary bat? Is it a little brown bat? Whatever it is, you're going to look at these different kinds of characteristics to figure it out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of our bats. So this guy's super, super duper cute. This is our big brown bat. And in Missouri and most places in North America, so maybe in Tennessee where some of you are, you will likely see this guy. This is our big brown bat, and he is our most prominent bat throughout the state. So like I said, the pictures that I took, and I'll show you here, these are big brown bats. Aren't they cute? Look at them all stacked up on top of each other. Now, our big brown bats and most of our bats, whenever they roost during the day, and roosting is what we call, because they are nocturnal. So they sleep during the daytime and they're awake at night. When these guys are roosting during the daytime, they do it colonially. So what that means is that they're in a colony. So there's a whole bunch of them together. As you can see here, I'm not even sure how many bats are in there. There's more than 10, that's for sure. And they're all stacked up on top of each other. Super duper cute. But they do that to help conserve energy, and because usually a bat will find a cool place to roost and all the other bats are going to come right onto it. Especially in this building where I found these guys. And I found them not by looking up, but by looking down. So that sounds a little bit crazy, but check this out. When you look down, you can find a lot of evidence that bats leave behind. So on this porch is a big pile of guano. So guano is just a fancy word for bat poop. So this giant pile of bat poop doesn't usually build up, but the area that this is in the park isn't being used right now because of the coronavirus. It's in a group camp, and we weren't allowed to rent out the group camp. So it hasn't been cleaned like it normally would be. So normally about once a week, this would get cleaned up, but because it hadn't been cleaned up, it to me was a giant pile. So these bats had this giant pile below their roost because while they're sleeping, they're still gonna poo. And so it just built up over time, and I saw it. And so then I looked up, and then these are the cute little guys that I saw. Super, super adorable. See if it'll switch back. Did it switch back? I think it did. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is some of the movement that bats do. In Missouri, it's super easy to tell the difference between a bat and a bird when they're flying. So bats, like I said, are nocturnal. So when they become active at dusk. So that means when the sun's coming down. So a lot of times when the sun's coming down, you can see these guys, they'll fly out of their roosting spots, and they're going to go and look for food. And so if you're a bat and you're in the state park, the best places are going to look for food are around lights and around water. So, but what are they going to eat? Our Missouri bats really enjoy eating insects. They super love insects, so much that they will eat 1,000 insects in a minute. 1,000 in a minute. So if you think about insects that they like to eat mosquitoes. Do you guys like mosquitoes? I don't like mosquitoes. They bite me. It's itchy. It's red. Don't like it. But if we got these guys around, they are going to eat up a ton of mosquitoes every single day, and they're going to help us out with that. Sorry, this is backwards, so it's hard for me to see it. So they also eat other insects that can be pests on our agriculture. So things that might eat things like our corn or soybeans or things like that that we might be growing, or if you have a vegetable garden. So they'll help to eat those sorts of pests. And on top of that, they are also excellent pollinators. So there's a whole bunch of bats that just like to eat fruit and nectar, and they help to pollinate things. Our Missouri bats can eat about half of their body weight in one night in food. Half of it. So if you think if it weighs 10 pounds, which a bat doesn't weigh 10 pounds, it weighs just a few ounces. If it weighs 10 pounds, it means it would eat 5 pounds of food. That's so much food for them to eat. So how do you see bats at your house though? If you live in town, it's likely that you're not going to see them super duper often, but you totally can. So I live in town. I live over by the Trails Regional Library, and a lot of times I'll watch the street light when it comes on at night. And if you guys do the same sort of thing around your house, you might be lucky enough to see one of these guys come in. So our bats fly, and I know I said it's easy to tell what they are when they come out of their roosting spots. And they do that because they kind of fly in a crazy pattern. So when you see a bird fly, it just comes in and it kind of glides and it moves around just a little bit. But when a bat flies in, it looks like it's all over the place. I hope that you can see that okay. So he kind of flies all over the place, and it looks kind of crazy. And again, the birds will just come in and kind of swoop down and be nice and gentle and elegant. When a bat comes in, it's like, ooh, here I am. I'm all over the place. So it's one of the easiest ways to be able to tell that it's a bat versus a bird if you can't see it very closely. Now let's talk about how bats see and how they hear. So bats do have eyes. And let me see if I can, so it might be a little bit hard to see, but I'm going to show it up here on the camera. So on our little bat here, you can see, if I can hold him straight. So he's got his tragus on the side, and then right down here by his nose is where his eye would be. But of course, eyes are soft tissue, so we can't preserve them as well as we can fur and bits of skin. So it doesn't stay, but his eye would be right down here by his nose. So bats have eyes, and they can see just about as good as we can. So a lot of people think that they're blind. Bats are not blind whatsoever. They can see pretty good. However, they do have that super unique ability that helps them to get their food and their prey and to move around. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Let me see. Uh-oh. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about, you guys can see that okay? All right, we're going to talk about echolocation. Everybody has probably heard about echolocation because it is super, super duper cool. So echolocation is how bats can find and hear their prey and other things out in the world without seeing it with their eyes. So they don't have super great night vision, but they are awake at night. And this is a unique adaptation that they have acquired to help them out with it. So it's like they can see with sound. So if you guys see this picture here, you can see our cute little bat friend, and he's going after his moth here. And so the yellow colors that are coming from the bat are the bat sending out a radar, essentially, or sonar. So it's sending it out in just a wave, and it's leaving its body in this wave. And when it hits something, that information will bounce off of that object. In this case, it's a moth, and the information will come back to the bat. Now, they do this by sending out a high frequency sound, or sometimes they send out what we call a broadband sound, which is a whole bunch of different ones to see what they bounce off of. And it bounces off objects or insects or whatever's in its path, and the information bounces back to them like we just talked about. Now, the bat can use this information to tell how far something is in front of it. It can tell the size of the thing that's in front of it and the shape of the thing that's in front of it, which is pretty crazy. So it's just sending out these sound waves, and they're bouncing back, and they're getting all of that information, which is stuff that we would normally get from our eyes. Some bats do this in different ways. Some of them use their mouth, and they send the information out from their mouth. Some of them have a special adaptation on their nose called a nose leaf that sends and receives the sound. Or not receive, it sends the sound, it doesn't receive them. Their ears receive the sound when it comes back. So remember, we talked about they have those ear flaps just like us, the tragus on the side of their head, and it's so sensitive, their ears are in there, that it helps to protect it. But not all bats use echolocation. Some bats, like our mega bats, which are really, really big bats, so you think like fruit bats that live near the equator, they don't have a need for echolocation, so they don't use it. Some animals use echolocation as well. A lot of people have heard about dolphins and whales, and they use echolocation in water. But other animals that use echolocation are some birds do, some rodents, some insects, and even us humans, we use echolocation. And you're probably thinking, what? That's crazy. How do we do that? So we have created underwater sonar that it's not necessarily part of our bodies, of course, but it is a technology that we created so that we can use the same kind of thing that bats and dolphins do to see what's around us. So we can send out the sonar underwater and see what the bottom of the ocean looks like, which is pretty cool, I think. Okay. So I also wanted to show you guys. So I have this right here, and I know it's going to be a little bit hard to see. This is a skeleton from a Mexican free-tailed bat. Now, they're not one of our Missouri residents, but they do, they sometimes can be seen in Missouri. And so they're a very small bat. So you can see this is my hand, right? And it covers up the entire bat. But he's a very small bat. But I wanted to show you guys how cool this bone structure is. So we can see if I can get it close. So you can see that is the bat's head, right? Right in there you can see the shape of its head. And you can see its rib cage and its shoulder blades all the way down. Look, you can even see his tail. Sorry, I wish I could move straight, but apparently I don't know how. And then its wings. So you can see those long fingers that we were talking about in the anatomy of it. And you can see his thumb sticking off there on the very edge. Super, super cool. Now, another adaptation that our bats have is how they deal with winter. I'm sure most people have heard of it, but we'll go ahead and talk about it a little bit. So hibernation. Hibernation is basically a big sleep where animals can just take a big nap during the winter, and then they wake up and when it's springtime again. And that's how they deal with the cold temperatures and the lack of food and the lack of water. Our bats do the same thing. So what they do is they lower their heart rate, which is how fast their heart is beating. They lower it super, 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 super low. They also lower their breathing. So of course, breathing, they have lungs just like we do in their bodies. They have lungs, and their breathing, they just slow it down super, super low, just like their heart rate. And their body temperature, remember they're endotherms, just like us. Their body temperature, they lower it so that it matches the air temperature. So if it's 30 degrees outside, they're in the air, their body is going to be 30 degrees, which is pretty chilly for a little guy like this. But how do they do that? Well, they spend the time right now during the fall, they spend this time preparing for the winter. So what they're doing is that they're eating lots and lots and lots of those nasty mosquitoes that we don't want. And they're building up their fat reserves. So on their body, they just start to get a little bit chunky. They start putting layers of fat on their body so that they can survive through the winter. So some bats will have about 2 times their body weight. So it's like the weight of 2 bats during the winter. When they are hibernating, they will find a nice cozy spot. A lot of our bats will roost in caves, which are very important in Missouri. We have a lot of caves, and our bats will roost in them. But some of our bats don't do that. Some of our bats will roost in under leaf litter or even in the ground, which is pretty crazy. In the state park, we have a red bat that will roost in the leaf litter, and when we do a prescribed burn, it will hear the fire coming towards it, and it'll wake it up and it'll get out of danger, which is pretty neat. I actually got to see that a couple of years ago during a burn, which was really cool. So they hibernate during the winter. I just want you guys to get a really good look at this guy. So they hibernate during the winter, but they shouldn't wake up. So waking up can be deadly for bats because they only have so much energy stored up in their fat to make it through. Now, if they do wake up, and sometimes they will wake up, a lot of times they'll go right back to sleep. But sometimes it doesn't really work that way. Now, bats are in danger of white nose syndrome, which a lot of people have heard of. Okay, so this is a picture of a little brown bat that has white nose syndrome. So if you're looking at you can see his tragus there, and then his little nose, and then he's got this white powder all over his fur on his nose. So white nose syndrome is a disease that our bats all over the world are getting, and it's really causing a lot of damage because how it works is that the bats because they live in these colonies of a lot of bats all next to each other, they will transfer the disease from one bat to another super easily. The bat will get the disease and it will make them really, really, really thirsty. So if these guys are sleeping through their winter time and they've put up all their fat energy and store their fat in their energy, they only have so much to make it through the winter time. So when they're woken up by being extra, extra thirsty, they're using those extra fat reserves that they had planned on using throughout the whole winter. So they'll wake up and they need a drink. And a lot of times in the winter is around Missouri is water plentiful? Not really. A lot of times it is the ground is hard, it's really cold, maybe there's snow, but did it melt? Probably not. So they have to look for water. And because they are woken up by this thirst and they're using all this energy, sometimes they don't make it back to where they were hibernating if they found water, or even if they found water. So sometimes they won't even make it to finding water, and then they unfortunately die because of it. So this white nose syndrome is getting to our bats, and we think it was mostly from people. So a lot of times people really enjoy exploring cave systems. I like to explore cave systems, and I'm sure you guys would probably enjoy that too. But when we go into a cave system, we bring things from outside into the cave. And so sometimes if we have visited other cave systems, we might have the white nose disease on our clothing or on our shoes or on our equipment or anything that we bring with us. And so what we think happened is that this disease was passed from one cave to another cave to another cave and exposed to our bat friends from people carrying it on their clothes or their equipment or their gear. So then we end up with a bunch of little powdery nose guys like our little white bat or our little brown bat here. So how can we prevent that from happening? Well, one, we close down our caves. And I know if you go to a lot of state parks that have caves in Missouri, then those cave systems are blocked off. A lot of times they have gates in front of them and they have barriers to prevent people from going into them. And that is really to protect our bat species. Because in Missouri, we have 14 different kinds of bats, but half of them are endangered or imperiled. So endangered means that there's not enough of them in the world, and imperiled means they're on their way of being not enough of them. And they could go extinct. So half of our bat species in Missouri are in danger of going extinct. The other half of our bat species are doing okay, but they can all still get very sick from this white nose syndrome. So the best thing to do is to not go from cave to cave to cave. And if you really do need to explore caves, and they are super cool, if you do need to explore caves, to change your clothes, change your shoes, and don't wear the same gear and equipment into different caves. So you would say, these are my shoes that I wear at this cave, and I will wear a different pair of shoes at this other cave. You can also sanitize and clean your clothing and your shoes, but that doesn't always work. So there's a little bit of a controversy on that. So let's talk about some myths of bats. So we already talked about one. People say that bats can't see, but we know for a fact that they can, that they have as good a vision as we do. It's just not very good at night. Another myth is that people are scared of bats because they think they're going to fly and get in their hair. So bats don't care about your hair. They really don't. They don't want to have anything to do with your hair. What they want to do is eat mosquitoes and insects and live a happy fat bat life. A lot of people are scared of them because they say, all bats are blood suckers. They're all going to suck my blood. No, they're not. They're not going to do that. So there are different kinds of bats in the world, and there are a couple of different kinds of blood-sucking or sanguinivore bat species out there, but I think there's only two. Out of like 1,000 different kinds of bats, there's only 2 that are vampire bats. So most of our bats, especially around here, they eat insects. And some of our other bats in the world, they eat fruit or they like nectar, but there's only a couple that really like blood. And another one is they only live in haunted places. So places that have spooky haunted ghosts. That's not true at all. Bats, right now, our bats will roost in porches. They'll roost in trees. They'll roost anywhere. In Noster, we have shagbark hickory trees, and they have a bark that kind of comes off of the tree trunk, and it's a perfect roosting spot for our bats. So they'll crawl up the bark and nest or roost underneath the bark during the daytime until it's time to come out and to eat. So our bats are really awesome, and they won't get in your hair, and they're not part of haunted houses or anything like that, and they're not all bloodsuckers, and they can see just great. Some really awesome things about bats are that they're pollinators. So a pollinator is something that takes pollen from one plant to another, and a lot of times it results in fruit. So I have this book right here, which you might be able to find for free at your local library, like Trails Regional Library. This is Bats in the Pantry. This is a cookbook, and this book is super duper cool. It takes, it has recipes. So this is a recipe. I just opened it up randomly for a black bean soup. I hope you guys can see it. So right next to each ingredient that has something to do with bats, it has a bat symbol. So it's a recipe book that shows you each food that has something to do with bats in its life cycle. So it either needs bats to maybe make a fruit, or the bats have to pollinate other things, but it's a huge cookbook, and it's got tons of recipes, and every recipe in here has to do with bats in some way. And that doesn't mean that it's a spooky Halloween recipe book. No, this has tofu and veggie salad in it. That doesn't sound spooky to me. It sounds delicious. So it's a super neat book, and it demonstrates all the cool different kinds of things that these pollinators can do. And we did talk a little bit about guano. So you guys remember, sorry, I'm a little slow here. So you remember our guano. So our big pile of guano, this is excellent fertilizer. So if you do have bats that are near your home, or you know where they are, like there's this porch here, you can put the bat guano on your garden, and it will help your garden plants grow, which is pretty cool. Now, there are very few roosting spots when you live in town for bats. A lot of times our houses, they might have a couple of trees, but mostly we have grass around them, especially if we live in town and there's roads and buildings and crazy stuff all over the place. So one of the things you can do to help our bats is to build a bat house and install it near your house. So if you think about it, at my house, for some reason, there's always a million mosquitoes. And I can't quite figure out why. And I suspect maybe a neighbor has maybe some standing water. But regardless of that, if I had bats around, then I would definitely have less mosquitoes because of how many they eat. And I have for you guys on the Bat Conservation International website, these are some links here. So Bat Conservation International is an organization that helps with bat conservation across the world. And so I have the website there, and on their website, they have the second link here as diagrams, free diagrams for you to build bat houses that you can install at your house. And there's different kinds of bat houses that you can make. But yeah, so just check it out. And I also included some information about white nose syndrome if you would like to check that out as well. Because the best thing that we can do for our bats is to protect them from white nose syndrome. Okay. There's that. Okay, guys, I do have a couple other things to show you. So, of course, we love the library. So I just got some of my favorite books that I have in the Parks Research Library, which you can see a little bit of it behind me. So we have some really cool, this is America's Neighborhood Bats. And this is written by one of our leading bat experts in North America. So it's a really good book. And I suggest that you guys check it out. And here's another one. So this is a scholastic book, so it's real thin, but it has just some real basic, real cool information about bats. And it's, you know, it's a scholastic book, so you could probably get it at a book fair. But it's got some good information. And then this one is just called Bats, which is also really good. So these are part of our research library at the park, and you might be able to find these at our Trails Regional Library or on interlibrary loan. So they're pretty cool books. And then I have, because books are amazing, right? I have this book about nature poetry, and I have a poem about bats that I'd like to read to you guys if you're interested in listening, okay? This is called From Bat Cave, and it's by Eleanor Wilner. The cave looked much like any other from a little distance, but as we approached, came almost to its mouth, we saw its walls within that slanted up into a dome, were beating like a wild black lung. It was plastered and hung with the pulsing bodies of bats, the organ music of the body's deep interior, alive, the sacred cave with its 10,000 gleaming eyes, near the clustered rocks where the sea beat and the leather wings of its own dark waves. So that's a beautiful picture of a bat. Okay, guys, so that is what I have to share with you guys, my little bat friend, about bats. And I think we can open up, Sarah, if you're ready for questions. Sure. Oh, Sarah's already sharing links, I see.
Yeah, I started looking in the catalog as soon as you pulled books out. I didn't find the Batty, I'm sorry, what was the Bats in the Pantry cookbook? But I already have an old one. I have an inquiry in. It might be available on interlibrary loan, but I'm going to see if we can buy a copy for Trails. I did find the second book you shared in our catalog, and then I also have a link in the chat to all of the books about bats that we have with just a title search for bats. So feel free to click on those links. They'll direct you to the library's catalog, and you can place holds. 50 is the limit, so go crazy. That's what I like to do. I
always have a million books on hold.
I do too. You can you can keep doing it forever and ever. That's the beauty of the library. Just keep putting books on hold, getting them, put some more books on hold. It's a beautiful thing. We did have a question from Lily in the chat. Lily wants to know where bats live and when they aren't flying around catching food.
That
was at the beginning of the program. She might know, but maybe we could talk about that a little more.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about it some more. So I know I mentioned a little bit, but when bats are not flying around catching food, they are roosting in different spots, usually out in nature. So that tree that I was talking about that had the shagbark hickory that has the shaggy bark that comes off the side, a lot of our bats in this park will roost up in there. Sometimes they'll just roost in tree hollows or underneath awnings. So we have a lot of historic buildings in the park, and that's where I saw them on that porch, was one of our historic buildings. So pretty much anywhere that they can just hang out for the day, that's where they're gonna be. So if you want them near your house, then you just need to build a bat house and give them a special place to be. So I have a question that says, how hard is it to attract bats to your area? This person's in the country, and how to place a bat house. So really, if you put a bat house up, the bats will come. They just need a place to hang out. That's all you need. And there is some old wives' tale that I've heard about that people, they take guano and make a slurry, so mix it with water, and it's supposed to attract bats. But I don't think that's true. I think it's just an old wives' tale. So if there's food and shelter and water, the bats will be there. And I hope that answered your question. Yeah. Does anybody else have questions? The whole
Looks
family.
like the whole family. I'll go ahead and unmute you so you can ask your question.
Emma's crying right now, so never mind about that. Anyway, will bats sometimes live in attics?
That's a good question. Yeah, bats will totally sometimes live in attics. So a lot of time our attics will have an opening that outside, and they'll just, it's an easy way for them to get inside, and they're nice and safe and protected. So they definitely will sometimes live in there. A lot of times we have problems with that because their guano doesn't smell like perfume. It's pretty stinky, and it can build up on the below where they're roosting. So the best way to prevent them from getting into your attic, if you want, is to close those external openings so that you can't get inside. And if they're already inside, if you contact your conservation agent for your county, they should be able to help you get them out.
Thanks.
Cool. It's Paul says in the chat that we covered houses, and Anne says she found Bats in the Pantry on Amazon. Yeah, it's a pretty cool book. I like it a lot. Who else has questions?
Oh, there's one. You see
If
that in the chat?
To get inside your house, best way to catch and release it. So touching bats is not anything I would advise. Now, I know I'm touching this guy, but he's not alive. So bats can, in fact, carry rabies, which is a disease that people and other animals can get. Now, when they bite people, biting people and giving them rabies is not something that happens every day. It's a very rare thing that can happen, but it can happen. So it's important that if we find a bat, that we don't touch it, we don't pick it up, that we don't pick it up to protect ourselves from it. So the best thing to do if you get a bat inside your house is to not touch it, but you don't want it in your house. So what do? First, I would call our conservation agent because they might be immediately available to come and help you. They are, I know I talk about it several times, but they are a great source of help in Missouri, especially when dealing with our natural wildlife and even some unnatural wildlife. They're a great source of help. But sometimes they're not available, and we only have one agent per county, so maybe they're busy dealing with a raccoon somewhere else. So if you can't get help, what I would suggest is if it is, so sometimes when they wake up, they're kind of like, and laying on the ground and they're not really moving around. You can put a towel over them and try to move them outside. But again, getting anywhere near the bat is really not the best idea. But you can try to be very careful and cover it up with a towel or a blanket of some sort to put it outside. If it's flying around your house, open a window, open a door, and try to get it outside. I hope that answers your question, Sharon. So Paul asked the best bat costume recommendation, and I would say put on some black or brown clothes and make your own wings. And you can make them attach from your arm to your side of your body and just have them go up and down. And of course, you can make your face look like fur, which is what this is supposed to look like.
I put a little link to a paper plate.
Poop on your head.
That's a
great question.
So they might, if you were underneath them when they're roosting, they might poop on your head, but they're not going to try to target you. they're not going to do that. But if you're under them while they're sleeping, you might get pooped on. So somebody wants to know what the biggest bat is, and I'll tell you what, I'm not sure. So let's see. If we can figure it out. I bet it's a tropical fruit bat. Oh, the flying fox. That's what I've Googled and found out. The flying fox is our biggest bat, and it is big. It's like the size of a dog. Yep. Okay. Let's see. Does anybody else? My favorite type of bat. That is a great question. So the hoary bat is actually my favorite bat, and that's this guy. And that's because he has dusty fur. So it's brown, but it's got the white on the top. And I just happen to have one. So that is luckily my favorite kind of bat. Lily, you have a question?
Yeah.
What's your question?
How many kinds of species are there at bats?
That is a great question. And I wrote it down. Where did I write it down? We have like 1,000 different kinds of bats in the world. 1,000. So that's a number. Yeah. The smallest bat. That is another good question. I don't know the answer, so let's find out. These are things I should have looked up, I think. There is a tiny bat called a hognose bat. That is the smallest bat.
That sounds weird.
It does sound weird. Yeah, super tiny. Okay. Do we have more questions?
Will bats land on your arms?
Will land on your arms? I don't really think so. Unless you turn into a tree, maybe. So I don't think you have to worry about it. Just like they won't come into your hair, I don't think they'll land on your arms either. But that's a good question too. Does anybody else have a question?
Can you have a pet bat?
That's a very good question. So in Missouri, we have wildlife code that protects our wild animals. And by protecting them, it also says that we cannot keep them as pets. So bats, because they live in a colony and the way that they live in nature, they wouldn't do well as a pet and keep them in captivity. So we have to let them be outside. It's just the same way we can't go out and catch a possum or a raccoon and make it a pet. They're protected in Missouri. Anybody else? Lily, you have another question? You're on mute.
Thanks.
Got it.
What's your question?
What is the medium kind of bat?
The medium kind of bat. That's a good question. I'm going to look it up real quick.
I think what we really need for our next presentation is a hierarchy of bats from biggest to smallest.
Yeah. So
that way we can know for sure.
It looks like the northern bat is the medium-sized bat, which is not as fun of a name as hognose bat.
What?
I thought I heard a
What
question.
are all the bugs that they eat?
That's a great question. So they eat a ton of mosquitoes, but sometimes they eat other insects like
You're right. The
beetles or anything else that flies. Like a ton of different kinds of insects. Mosquitoes are my favorite insect they eat, though.
okay.
Okay, I'm gonna pull up. Let's see. Northern bat. Okay, so I've got a picture of a northern bat, guys, to share with you. Oh, hold on, that's the wrong screen. Did it work?
We can see that. Oh, we saw it, and now it's the presentation again. But we did see the image. You had it up.
Okay, there you go. There's our northern bat.
There you go.
Okay, and then we wanted to see what the hognose bat. So it looks like it's also called a humming or a bumblebee bat. So you can see a picture of it here, but it doesn't really show its size. Super tiny. And then, okay, so the other questions are, what noises or sounds do they make? And what is a baby bat called? So I don't know the answers to those either. So a baby bat.
What noises do they make?
Let's see. Oh, they're called pups. I did know that. I just didn't remember. And then the noises. So we can't hear their echolocation because it's too high of a frequency. But they do make some pretty crazy noises. So I'll see. Hold on. Let me see if I can get it to work here to share it with you guys. Okay, you ready? So those are some of the sounds that that bats make. Pretty crazy, huh? Okay, and then, oh, I better stop this before. No, I did the opposite. Don't do it. Stop. Sorry, guys. Then somebody asked how long a bat can live. And so a bat can actually live for 30 years. That's a long time. 30 years. They can live for up to 30 years. But of course, it's going to depend on the species of bats and where they live and different things. But 30 years. Paul asked if they can only eat in flight or they might ever catch stuff on plants. Yeah, they do both. So they can swoop down and catch stuff on plants. A lot of them eat, well, our insect eating ones, of course, can get insects off of plants and things like that and catch them in flight. But also the ones that eat fruit, of course, the fruit doesn't fly around or anything. So they would go down and get the fruit, and nectar stays in flowers too. So do bats stay with their mate for life? That's a really good question. And I wonder, hold on, let me look at a book. You know, I bet it depends on, and this is just a guess, I bet it depends on the species of the bats. Oh, mating is promiscuous, so that means no. Bats can walk, they definitely can, and if you look online, you can find a lot of videos of bats like walking. They'll use their fingers and their legs, and they'll walk across things, which is pretty cool. Like they can move up a tree bark just by walking up it instead of flying. What other questions do you guys have? You guys are asking.
Did we answer the? Did you answer the how long can a bat live? I might have missed it.
30 years.
30 years. Okay, right. I remember that now.
Yeah. I feel like maybe I missed somebody's question. There's a lot.
I think what we really need is maybe we could do a featured blog post on the library's website, and we can link all of these awesome books you're talking about and answer some of these questions for anyone who wants to know more. Maybe we can publish that after this so everyone can do some more bat research and answer all these cool questions.
The Bat Conservation International is an awesome resource. They even have, if you're interested in, they even have teaching materials available for teachers or educators, which is pretty cool.
Great.
So there's a question that says, how many bats are in a normal colony? And again, that's going to depend on the kind of bats. Just like we saw in the picture of those big brown bats, there was a ton of them in there. But some bats will only have just a few of them, and some will just have, like if you go into a cave, sometimes there'll just be hundreds of bats. So they can range from just like one or two of them to hundreds of them roosting together. And it does depend on the kind of bat it is and the space available. So if there's only enough space for a couple of bats, that's all there's going to be. So will bats travel long distances? I think they can, but I don't know exactly how far they can travel in one night. So you got to think about the kinds of energy that it will take for them, that they have to spend to travel long distances. A lot of times they'll stay in one general area because they know where their food is and their water and their roosting sites. So Paul asked if they'll eat Japanese beetles, and I think, Paul, that they might, because I know you're on the same page about Japanese beetles as I am, but for you guys that don't know, Japanese beetles are an invasive insect species that are in North America right now, and they kind of just destroy things. For example, my rose bushes, they destroyed them this year, but they stayed away from my garden, which was nice. And I think there might be some kinds of bats that might eat them, because we do have some bats that have mouth parts better suited to eating beetles, because they're kind of hard and crunchy, versus mosquitoes, which are soft and squishy. But I don't know for sure if they do eat them, but I know that there will be some that could possibly eat them. There's a question that says, will males fight over females? With them being promiscuous, which means they'll have many partners, that seems likely. Super, super likely. Did the whole family, were you guys raising your hand? Yes. Did you have a question? You're on mute.
You guys will have to unmute yourself if you click on your little button, your microphone. There you go.
There you go. What's your question?
What are you both doing? Ours says that we're still on mute.
Well, I can hear you right now.
Oh. Anyway, a lot of bats are killed each year just because people wake them. Again.
Yes. So if you find bats that are hibernating, the best thing to do is just to leave them alone, because if you wake them up, remember we talked about how they spend their energy when they get woken up, and then they might not have enough energy to make it through the winter. And that's another reason why the white nose syndrome is such a big issue, because it wakes them up. It makes them so thirsty. That's a good point. Super good point. Yeah. So I think Sarah had a great idea, and I'm going to make a list of these awesome books that we have in our research library, and I'll put those links that I have in the presentation so you guys don't have to try to find them for Bat Conservation International and information about the white nose syndrome, and then those free diagrams to make your own bat house, which free diagrams are my favorite thing, so that you guys can do that at home.
Yeah.
Can little bats swim? That's, you know what, I don't know if they can swim. I would guess that they could. I've seen bats swoop down and get fish out of water. National Geographic has some pretty good videos for that. So I would guess that they can swim, but I won't say yes or no. But yeah, so we'll put those resources together for you guys, and for anybody else, Paul, you cracked me up. For anybody else that has the super great questions about bats, there's so much to learn about them. Definitely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for all of the awesome information. And I'm so glad that you were able to find all the information that you didn't know the answer to in books or by doing research. That's a great thing to remember if you have lots of questions about all these different things, bats, snakes, all sorts of natural resources. You can find them in books at the library, or by listening to, trusted experts like Chris talk to us. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this presentation for us today, and I'm so glad all of you could join us. And I hope to see you all again soon.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for coming. This was a lot of fun.